And welcome. Thank you so much for coming here today. This is our first speaker in the UBILS or UB Institute for Learning Sciences speaker series in 2025. You may not have been expecting to see me. My name is Naomi Thompson, but I'm filling in for Chris Hoadley today. We're really excited to get started on this sunny Valentine's Day. So thank you for being here. We are thrilled to welcome Dr. Melissa McCartney to start off our series. Dr. McCartney is an associate professor in the Department of Pharmacology and Toxicology in the Jacobs School of Medicine and Biomedical Sciences here at UB. She is also a core faculty member of the UB Institute for Learning Sciences. Dr. McCartney's research interests center on what educators can do to help undergraduate biology majors see themselves as scientists, especially when identifying a scientific career path and entering the STEM workforce. So I will go ahead and hand this off to Dr. McCartney to get us started. Thank you for being here.
Okay, how's the sound on this? Good? Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me today. I usually speak to rooms of biologists, so it's great to have a more diverse group here, tell you about what we're doing in the lab and see what ideas and suggestions you have for us. So I wanted to spend a couple minutes telling you who I am, my background, how I got here, why I study what I study. I am trained as a neuroscientist. I did my PhD and a postdoc in neuroscience. This is some of my data from my postdoc work that ended up on the cover of Journal of Neuroscience. So this is my big, in my younger days, I was a cover girl for a journal. Not many people read, but I really loved neuroscience. I enjoyed what I was doing, but I knew I never really wanted to run a lab or write grants. I wasn't sure what to do after this postdoc. And I applied to lots of different things, thought about different things. And where I ended up first was the National Academy of Sciences in Washington, D.C. I got there to Washington the same week as President Obama was inaugurated for the first time. So it was a much different time for science back then. It was exciting. People were hopeful. Things were moving. My role at the National Academies, I worked for a committee at the time. It was called the Committee for Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine. It's changed names a few times since then, but it's basically the diversity arm of the National Academies. And that's where I got into a lot of my diversity work. And thinking not only do we want to bring people to science, but once we get them there, we want to keep them. So a lot of thinking about retaining all these scientists that we're training in the work I did at the academies. And I liked policy. I enjoyed, sharing science with different people, but I didn't love it enough to stay forever. So I tried something new again. I went to Science Magazine, where I was an editor for several years. Because of my background in neuroscience, I started handling the neuroscience papers. And because, neuroscience, the brain, I was handling all this brain science, people were like, oh, you must also know about education, right? So that got me more thinking about, oh, what do I know about education? And we started thinking about how to bring education as a science more into the magazine. So publishing education research papers, as well as also using the magazine as a vehicle to push science out more to undergraduate students and the general public. And so we started doing a lot of outreach projects. I started writing grants again, which was something I had never wanted to do. So be careful what you wish for. And we started, one of the biggest projects I worked on was this Science in the Classroom, where we took papers published through Science and we annotated them so that the general public and undergraduates could come to where the source of the science and read a paper without being stumbled by words or methods or things like that. And the idea was, teach people how to come to the source rather than just blindly believing what they hear on the radio or a TV show. In the background, running through all of this, I was very active in my professional societies, mostly doing kind of ad hoc career development for people like me who had PhDs, who wanted to contribute science, but they didn't want to be at the bench. They weren't exactly sure where they fit in or how they could contribute. And so I kind of, almost like a hobby, started doing career development through my professional societies. And all this programming, things we were developing, as everyone here knows, if you want to get grants for ideas, you have to show that the ideas are working, right? So you have to collect data somehow. But because I was working at the magazine, we didn't have a research office. I couldn't get an IRB, those kinds of things. And so strangely enough, I found my way back to academia. I started my assistant professor job at Florida International University in Miami in the spring of 2017, exactly when President Trump took office for the first time. So things changed in Florida pretty slowly at first, but then they accelerated pretty quickly related to things I'm interested in: education, DEI, science outreach, factual science, those kinds of things. So I was at Florida about 7 years. I left in the summer of 2023 and I came to UB. I'm absolutely a political refugee from Florida, if anybody ever wants to talk about that. And I think about that a lot. Tried so hard to get away from it, and then it found me again anyway. But all this collectively really plays into the research that I do. So building skills for students in science, career development for scientists. And I think all of my different experiences here in and out of academia really are the value that I bring to the work that I do. And I have two main philosophies that I carry with me as a scientist. The first is I think anyone can be a scientist. And I think we need scientists everywhere. So try to capture as many people we can in science and then send them out to however their science is going to work for them, however they can contribute it. And this is what I bring when I think about the career readiness for all the undergraduates that I support. So I'm going to start my talk today with where we're trying to go in the future. And this is a very simplified job projection growth, stating that STEM jobs are going to grow faster than others. And this has been the case for a while, but it's still the case looking forward. And so my job is to figure out how to train undergrads to take these jobs, and also how to diversify the undergraduates that are going to eventually fill these jobs. And so to think about where we're going to go in the future, we need to kind of reevaluate, okay, where are we today and how do we need to move that forward? So here's where we are today. Not surprisingly, the diversity of the STEM workforce does not match the diversity of the country. And this is a report from Pew Research where they go through and simplify it a little. But basically here is the diversity of the workforce in general. And here's where we are with STEM. So we're lagging behind with both Black and Hispanic populations. And it's our job as educators to try and fix this. So what could be a possible solution? Well, one solution is like, let's just graduate more STEM students, right? Problem solved, super easy, right? But I would argue that we are doing that already. Like there's dozens and dozens and dozens of programs out there getting students to persist to graduation, and all kinds of students, historically minoritized students, white students, we're all working to push everybody towards persist to graduate, which is great. I'm on board. I think these programs are awesome. Let's keep going. And I think the data is showing that they are working. So this is from the same Pew Research report. We do see an increase for STEM degrees across the board. It's a little smaller with the PhD degrees, but we are getting more students to the degree. And we can also make the argument that we're diversifying these graduates as well, especially with the Hispanic populations. Those degrees are on the rise. The Black populations are not quite as increasing as quickly, but they are increasing year over year. So I think the programs that we're investing in are working. We're getting more graduates and we're getting more diverse graduates. But I don't think that's enough. And mainly, the reason I think that is because I think there's a huge difference between getting a degree and getting into the workforce. So we can get students persist to their degree, but the day after graduation, what happens, right? And I don't think we should assume that students who get a degree are automatically going to the workforce. And I don't think we should assume that they know how to navigate to get into that workforce, because getting a degree is very different than finding a job. And I don't think we teach people how to do the second part of this. So I think this could be a type of an alternative solution. So in addition to increasing degrees, we need to give some kind of targeted career development specifically to STEM students within their disciplinary studies. Now, I'm focused on specifically on the biology, the biomedical students, but I think this is true across the board for STEM. And so what do I mean by this? So right now, I think career development and your discipline courses are very separate, right? And when this happens, if people are getting career development at all, it's usually seen as an elective. It's something that you do outside of class. And sometimes it's not even offered by the institution. Sometimes you have to leave the institution, which means only people with time, money, childcare, or other social capital, like a mentor or someone else in your life who tells you to do these things, will get these things. But if we make it part of a disciplinary curriculum, then what we have is it's worked into your semester load, it's paid for with scholarship and tuition waivers, it's respected by professors as part of the curriculum, right? And you also get this contextualization within the discipline. So we're teaching you career development through your discipline, so the two are connected. And I think what this tells us is that career development can be a lever for diversity in the STEM workforce, because without it, what's here on the left, only certain people are getting it. But if we make it more universal, everyone will get it, and that might help lower some of these barriers for entrance into the STEM workforce. So this is one of the things my lab studies, career development. Everyone who studies career development uses social cognitive career theory as their framework. We're no different. We use the same one. This is a pretty complex theory about how people identify a career path and then travel the career path. We've narrowed it down to three main factors, which are you need a career goal and strategies to reach the goal. You need what's called self-efficacy. So do you have confidence that you can see yourself in this career goal? And you need outcome expectations, which I like to think of as if-then statements. So if I network with doctors, I'll know more about how to become a doctor. So we look specifically at these three factors, but the problem was there was no way to measure how students were reacting or how they were achieving these three factors. So before we could really do any programming or implementation, we needed to figure out, okay, how are we going to measure these things? How are we going to measure them specifically in biomedical sciences? So I'm going to talk today about a couple of assessments that we've built. The first one, we're going to stick with that career goals and strategies. And this is work that was done in my lab by Roxana Gonzalez, my PhD student. And we did this by using a sequential exploratory approach, which means we started with qualitative data and found our way to quantitative measurements. I'm just going to walk you through our experimental design, and then I'll show you some of the data. So we did a very large data collection in the summer of 2023. We had about almost 1,500 undergraduates in biomedical sciences take our questionnaire. This data was collected at FIU, so it is a majority-minority institution. Our population was about 73% identified as Hispanic. And what we did was open-ended questions. We asked them, can you tell us your career goal? Can you tell us 6 strategies or up to 6 strategies that you use to reach this goal? So we got all this qualitative data. Roxana and another student, Mia, in the lab spent their whole summer going through 1,500 career goals and about 9,000 strategies and coding them. And we came up with 6 codes for career goals, 12 strategies that students were repeating over and over. We then turned that into a quantitative questionnaire. A year later, we gave it to the same population of students. And then we started doing some longitudinal analysis. Of the 1,500 who took it, we had about 170 who took it both years. So we were able to do some direct comparisons between the qualitative and the quantitative. So here's what we came up with. These are the 6 career goals students were identifying. Medicine is allied health. That's any kind, like dentist, nurse, doctor, those kinds of things. Research is any kind of basic biomedical research. Animal sciences is mostly veterinary, but with this particular population at FIU, we had a marine science program. So marine sciences falls under there. Other STEM are people who want to teach high school biology or forensic science, something along those lines. Non-STEM would be people who say they wanted to be a lawyer or an entrepreneur or something like that. And then we had some unsure. So does anybody want to guess how many students want to be a doctor? Or that, how many? 90? You're pretty close. We have about 73% want to go into medicine and allied health, and nothing even comes close to that. So most of our students are focused on those healthcare careers. So that, again, that's the qualitative data. When we do the quantitative counts, so this time they could just check what their career goal was. We just really see no changes. Nothing came out to be statistically different. So I think what this tells us is our quantitative assessment is pretty comparative to that qualitative data, and that career goals are pretty steady. And we also have a little bit of a longitudinal insight here because we did do this year over year. What I want to focus in here are these 10 students who are unsure of their primary career goal. When we look at them in what's a Sansky diagram to see how they change over time, we have these 10 unsures. Over time, 8 of them went into medicine, and 2 of them went into research. Now, those numbers are different than what I showed you here, right? We had 10 unsure in 23, 4 unsure in 24, which makes you think, oh, all 6 of them moved, right? But we see some direction in the other way too, which is interesting. So some people who had a career goal the first time were moving to unsure. But again, we had 170 students. This is not a lot of people. Here's everybody else. Career goals are pretty steady. There's not a lot of shift over time or among groups. And this is important for our particular population of these biomedical science students because here is a diagram with a lot of numbers in it. This is the for the medical school application cycle for the last 3 cycles. This is all the data of who's applying and who's getting in. And the only important number you really need is that one in purple down at the bottom right, which says 41.9. So what this is telling us is 42% of students get into medical school, right? But based on our data, for every 100 students we have, 80% of them want to go to medical school. About 34 will get in, which means 46 will have to change a career goal. So on average, we know 46 of our students are working towards a goal they're not going to reach. And I have a lot of hot takes on this. But at my core, I feel like we are taking money from these students and we're letting them believe that they're going to be something that's not going to happen. And I think as educators, we have a responsibility to help them figure this out before they leave our institution. So that's what we're finding and thinking about with goals. And then along with goals comes the strategies. So we found 12 strategies in our data set. And I just want to ask the audience, what would you, if you had to ask that question, what's the strategy that you are using to reach your career goal? What would you think a strategy would be? Networking? Doing well in your classes? Yeah. Okay. Yep. Reading online research. Okay, these are the 12 we found. I'll explain in a bit why some of them are different colors. And here's what we found, kind of with how many, the percentage of total strategies that students were mentioning, plus the percent of students using that strategy. And there's a couple things that pop out at me from this data set. This first one here is networking. We're at just about half of our students say that they're networking, which I feel like networking is a pretty universal career skill. Like anyone who's going to get a job after college should be networking. So I would really like this number to be much higher than just half of our students doing it, right? This one is someone who works in career development is like a knife in my heart. This is developed career documents. So this is, do you have a resume? Do you have an elevator pitch? Do you have a personal statement? Those kinds of things. We're at about 2.4% of our students are saying that they have this, which is not great. And this jumps out at me too. So this unpaid clinical experience, pre-health, pre-vet, these are the internships, the shadowing, those kinds of things that all those kids are going to need to get into these allied health programs, right? And 80% of our students want to take that path, but only about 20% of them are doing what you need to get there, right? So I think there's a lot of mismatch going on with strategies versus career goals versus how we as educators should be coaching students to be ready for when they leave college. And so just a reminder, this was the qual data. And I just want to make one point here. So what we did here was we asked students in a very short amount of time to say, what career strategies are you using? Think about it, recall if they've done it, and then write it down. And the data I'm going to show you here, where we turned it to quantitative, all they had to do was this idea of automatic retrieval, where just check a box. Yes, I've been doing that. I've been doing that. All right. So here's the data when we change it to quant. And things look very different. It's not as stable as what we saw with the career goals. So what we see in white are strategies that have changed, or sorry, strategies that have stayed stable. And what we see in gray are strategies that have changed. Either they've increased or decreased. And I think there's a lot going on here, but let me take you through those three that I already talked about. This idea that 80% of our students want to go to med school, but not enough of them are doing what you need to do to get there. That increased a little, but the percent of strategies overall stayed the same. So this was really steady, which again, 46% looks better than 20, but it's still not 80, which is where we're trying to get, right? Networking, this percent of students stayed the same, but a much lower percentage of the strategies that were counted. So I'm still a little nervous that everybody should be networking, but clearly everyone is not networking. And what we see with the career documents, this did go up a lot the second time when we asked it as a quantitative. And what I think might be going on here is maybe that stuff is just running in the background and people don't even think it's a strategy, right? They just know, yes, I'm in college, I need to have a resume. So maybe that's part of the discrepancy we see there between when they had to, think about it on their own versus just check a box. But in general, strategies are a lot more fluid than what we see with the goals. And trying to figure out what's happening here, we have one more piece of data that I'm going to tell you about. In between these two data collections, in the summer of 2023, we did some student interviews. So we sat with 6 of these students who took both assessments and asked them questions about why they were answering and what they were thinking about and what they plan to do in the future. And this data was analyzed by Carissa, another graduate student in our lab. And I'm going to walk you through what these data is going to look like. So for each student, the first column on the left, this is what they put in the qualitative assessment. So these were their short answers for what strategies they were using. The middle column is when we interviewed them and we sat with them and we said, are you doing this strategy? Or a lot of times what happened on these interviews, one of our strategies is teaching. So are you a TA? Are you an LA? Are you a peer tutor? Those kinds of things. And they would never talk about it on any of the assessments. But when we got them and we were talking to them about what they were doing, they'd say something like, oh, ILA for Dr. Bryn. And we're like, oh, that's a strategy. Why have you never mentioned it, right? So strategies that come up during the interview, and then the column on the right, that's the 2024 assessment, which was the multiple choice, check the box. So here's what we see across all 6 students. There's nothing really standardized or repetitive among it. I like student 4. This is what I would want everybody to see, right? You start with a couple strategies at the first time point, and all those strategies carry across time point to time point. And then as time goes on, you add a couple strategies each time. So to me, the strategies you start with, you're continuing, and you're adding strategies as you progress through your academic career. Nothing here jumps out at me as I don't think any of these students are in trouble. I think they have a decent amount of strategies. But overall, what I think it's telling is that just strategies are really fluid. I don't know if we're ever going to be able to perfectly measure them. I think our longitudinal insights are kind of mixed on what this is telling us. And as far as we're trying, to develop an assessment to give to educators to say, how are your students developing career-wise? This isn't as easy as with the career goals where, oh, both these data sets match. Here's an assessment that works. Also, I think strategies in general, just as time goes on, strategies change, right? As technology changes, as jobs change. For example, networking in 2019 looked way different than networking during the pandemic in 2020. So I think strategies themselves are, 4 years from now, there might be a new strategy that we didn't capture in any of our data. So does our quantitative assessment measure career strategies? Yes. Does it measure it perfectly? I don't know, but I kind of think measuring some strategies is better than not measuring strategies at all. So there's our work with career goal and career strategies. And we've also developed assessments for self-efficacy and outcome expectations, and I'll walk you through what we've done here. These are notoriously hard to measure because they are so specific person to person. A lot of it is done qualitatively. But if you want to measure large groups of students like we do, you can't really do qualitative work very easily. It takes a lot of time. So we found 2 examples of quantitative measures from the humanities. They're very old. They're from the early 80s. But we managed to find them, and we updated them to fit our current biomedical science student population, in the 2020s. So what we did was we took the outcome assessments from the humanities, we rewrote them to match our population. We did focus groups with students to make sure the language was getting the message across that we wanted to. And then because we had these existing assessments and the theories behind these assessments, we could do, a formal validation of the assessment. So we did some factor analysis. And here's what we found. You don't really need to know any of the specific items, except for self-efficacy, it came to about 21 items that loaded on one factor. And I know this seems like a really big survey, 21 items, but the original one was 54. So we really did condense it down. For outcome expectations on the right, we found with our population, it broke down into 3 factors. So the academic factor, are you doing well in school? The career decision-making factor, are you working on identifying the career that's right for you? And then networking, are you meeting people who are going to help you along this journey? And so we gave this assessment to 712 students in biology courses, again, at FIU. And we divided it up by year in school. So we looked at what the Gen Bio students were telling us and considering them to be freshmen, kind of introductory level students. The students who took genetics were a little introductory. They were mostly sophomore, junior level. And then we also surveyed the senior capstone courses, which were students who were about to graduate. So we're looking at career self-efficacy. It was a Likert scale from 1 to 6, with 6 being the high score. Does anybody want to guess how confident the Gen Bio students were that they were going to reach their career goal? Also knowing that 80% of them want to be doctors. 4? 4. Okay. Any other guesses? All right, they are at about a 4.75, which is pretty high. So good for them. They're very confident. I like it. How about the genetics students? They're kind of the junior, senior, or sorry, the sophomore, junior, kind of intermediate level students. Anybody want to guess where they are? Do you think they went down? Okay. Anybody think they went up? Yeah. Okay. They steady, right? So we're still real confident going into sophomore and junior year. Okay. And then how about the capstone students? Anybody? 1 vote for down? Couple of votes for down? Okay. They went up significantly, right? And so I think there's a lot to take from here. What I take from it is there was no change till senior year. I would really prefer for these scores to be, increasing across time. Like as you progress your academic career, you're getting more and more involved in your career search. And the fact that we don't really see a big jump until senior year makes me worry that we're waiting too late, that a lot of career development could and should be happening earlier. It shouldn't be happening as students are on their way out the door. And this is what we see with the outcome expectations. We don't see any change with academic and networking. I wouldn't expect it with academia or academic, right? Because do well in school should be consistent, whether you're a freshman or a senior. Networking, I wish, again, it was, increasing across time, but those scores are still pretty high, so people must be networking. And then again, with career decision making, so that is, are you taking steps to figure out what career you want? Again, we don't see a jump until senior year, which again signals to me we're waiting too long. This should be happening earlier, and this should be happening consistently. Okay, so now we have assessments to measure everything, and the assessments are specific to our population in the biomedical sciences. So what are we doing? Now that we have these assessments, how are we putting this into play? So I'm going to tell you about some current and future studies where we're going to explore this more. The first one, I am currently taking a class in mixture modeling, which is a much higher level of statistics than I was ever taught before. And it's taught by two professors of quantitative methods. So they're teaching us what to do with big data sets and how to look for patterns within those big data sets. So we're learning, the main thing we're learning is it's called latent profile analysis. And I'm going to walk you through the general framework of latent profile analysis, what it's going to tell us, and what I hope to find with our data set. So the goal of this is to find a profile of your students. So we have the goals and strategies, the outcome expectations, and the self-efficacy. Those have been measured individually and in certain time points many times, but they've never been measured together, and they've never been measured together and over time. So what we're going to do with our population, these giant data sets we have of 1,300 students, we're going to look and see what the profile is of students related to these social cognitive career factors. So what that looks like, we'll use each of the social cognitive career theory factors as what's called an indicator. So we'll look at career goal, not necessarily the type of career goal they have, but do they have one goal or do they have more than one? Because I'm interested now in this idea of who has a plan B, right? Since we know so many of our students are not going to reach plan A, how do we get these students to start thinking about plan B? It's going to take into account the total number of strategies that they're implementing, so like high, medium, low number of strategies. It's going to look at their self-efficacy scores, and it's going to look at their outcome expectation scores all together at the same time. And what this does, I haven't done it yet. I ran my code last week. It worked. Now I'm waiting for help trying to figure out what it all means. But what I'm going to get is something that looks like this. This is not my data. This is from a different paper. But it's basically going to group students into profiles. So I think I'll have a profile where everyone's doing very well, right? They're going to be real high on all my indicators. I'm going to have one where they're low, right? Students who haven't done any strategies. They don't have confidence in what they want to be. And I think I'm going to have a couple groups in the middle. And one of the groups in the middle I know is going to be people who have one career goal, no strategies, but sky-high self-efficacy, right? These students really think they're going to be doctors without doing any sort of legwork to get there. And that's the group I'm really interested in, kind of digging down into that group and seeing why are they missing all these things and how can I get it to them? And so once I have these profiles, then what we can do is instead of grouping, just making bar graphs, like here's the white students, here's the Hispanic students, what you do is you find your group first, and then you bring in your demographics. So it's a more kind of equitable way at looking at who is in these groups, who's making up these groups, what do they need. So for our covariates, once we have the groups, we're going to look at gender, race, ethnicity, year in school. We also have a lot of measures that I think are specific to career development. So we know whether or not these students identify a mentor. We know whether or not these students have participated in undergraduate research, which is I have a lot of hot takes on undergraduate research as well. One of them being, I don't think they're the silver bullet to going into science that we all think they are. And I'm excited to see what happens with this data, if I can back up my thought there. We also know their science identity score, their sense of belonging, and we know whether or not they've been involved in career development workshops. So a lot of different ways we can look and see who's in our groups. The final thing you can do with this kind of analysis is once you have your groups, you can also see how they're doing outcome-wise. And we have data for these students related to their intent to pursue a biomedical career, some career deliverables. So, do they have a resume? Have they done an elevator pitch? Those kinds of things. So I'm excited to see where this takes me, the profiles we find, who's in those different profiles, and how we can better start targeting career development, kind of personalized on what your profile says. Another thing we're doing is we are doing career workshops. So they're centered on social cognitive career theory. We're helping people identify goals, strategies, working on self-efficacy, those kinds of things. We've done 2 so far at FIU. We do them the week after school ends and before summer starts. So we have their focus for a whole week. It's a pretty intense week. We have about 65 students in each cohort. We've done 2. We have funding to do 3 more. So we will keep going with this. Of course, we do pre-post surveys. The post survey after the workshop, everybody loves it. Everyone has strategies. Everyone has a goal. Everything's really great. But what I'm interested in is, does it stick? So what happens 6 months, a year down the road? And what I'm going to tell you about today is basically my failed attempt at my first longitudinal data set. This is for the 2023 cohort. We surveyed them in April before the workshop. The workshop happened in May. We surveyed them right after. And then a year later, I sent emails around asking people to take a follow-up survey. I hadn't talked to them in a year. I had no incentive to give them. Not surprisingly, or maybe amazingly, 6 people wrote back to me, right? So I don't have a great data set. I'm going to show it to you, but know that I know it's not great. So what we're doing now, my second attempt at my longitudinal study, the 2024 cohort, every month I've written them an email. I talk about some kind of career development, project they should be working on. I give them some action items of things to do this month, and I link it back to all the materials I gave them at the workshop. So I'm staying in constant touch. I also did a 6-month follow-up. So around Thanksgiving, we sent out a 6-month questionnaire. We got about, big improvement too. We had gift cards to give away to people who took it. So I had about 40 out of 60 take that midpoint survey. I'm continuing with the monthly check-ins. And then in May of this year, so a year post-survey or post-workshop, we will survey them again with some gift cards, and we're also going to do some interviews. So a year from now, I'll have much better longitudinal data to show you. If anybody wants to talk about doing longitudinal studies, come see me because I've made a lot of mistakes. I can help you not make the same mistakes. But here's what I'll show you with this N of 6. So here's their career goals. This is before the workshop, and that is directly after the workshop. So we had 2 people kind of change their mind, which is great. We spent a lot of time in the workshop thinking about other biomedical careers and how they might work for you as a way to share your science. And then a year later, everybody went back to their original goal. So there was a little maybe thinking about something else in the middle, but everybody went home at the end, which is not surprising. I think career goals are really fixed. Here's what we see with strategies. So these are total number of strategies. The black bars are each one of the 6 students, and the blue bar is the average score. So before the workshop, they were averaging about 5.3 strategies. After the workshop, they dropped to 4.3, which makes me sad because we spent a lot of time talking about strategies at the workshop. But then a year later, they rebounded to 7.2. Which is good. I'm glad they're increasing strategies. I don't know if that's because of our workshop or just because, a year had gone by and maybe some of them had found a mentor or taken another class or something like that. So I'm happy that they're up there, but I don't know if it's anything that I did. Here's their self-efficacy. So a big jump after the workshop, and it kind of plateaus. Which is okay. Without the workshop, they still might be plateauing at a low 4. Here's the outcome expectations, career decision making. Again, a big jump after the workshop, and then it plateaus. And then pretty much the same thing with the networking. So what this is telling me is if I don't talk to them for a year, everything plateaus, right? But maybe this next round where I am checking in with them, I am giving them action items, I'm reminding them of all the stuff we did and reminding them how they can find all those resources. Maybe I will finally get to see that slope keep moving. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about is this career development within the discipline. So how are we getting more of our workshop content into actual biology and biomedical courses? I have mixed results on this as well. But I developed a course for the biomedical undergraduates in the Jacob School. It's an elective with the idea that sophomores would sign up for it, so they get some career development early while they still have time at UB to implement it, right? So they can still join a research lab at UB or network at UB, take some kind of offering that UB has to give them while they're still here, rather than waiting till they're seniors, telling them, oh, you should have done this. Now I can say, oh, you can do this. So this course, I marketed it, I developed it. One student registered, so it was canceled, but it's still on the books. It could still happen again. And some good news, my student Roxana, she's working with professors in the biology department to do kind of like a mini course. Starting after spring break, it will run for 5 weeks. And it will be part of the biology curriculum where students can take a career development course with biology credit and get some, again, at sophomore levels who we're targeting so that they can implement it while they're here. And then I've also developed a 199 course, which is pretty much the exact same thing as the failed course I developed. But I'm hoping with the 199, more people will take it. It's a smaller, course cap to meet. And I'm also hoping to start marketing it. Like if I can make this one a success, maybe then the word will spread. Oh, this is a good idea. This is a good course. And then maybe my sophomore level course will find new life with word of mouth. So we are in the early stages of getting it into the discipline, but we're working on it and hopefully we will be successful. And that is it. So thank you very much for coming. Thanks for your attention. And I'm happy to answer any questions. Yes.
Okay, it's on. Do you think there is some connection with the messaging to students? So thinking about like when you say, what are you going to do at your career for somebody who's a freshman versus let's say somebody who's a senior, and that might impact how they see the resources that they're seeking. So I wonder if like let's say the interventions for this professional development were presented in a way where it is almost like curriculum, right? When I have to take a chemistry course, I have to take this, I have to take that to get into the next thing. Will that have an impact at all?
Are you asking if we see different?
Yeah, like have you ever tried anything that has to do with, let's say, because the way students are trained is that with your academics, you have to take these specific classes. So if you're going to be a pre-med major, you have to take these classes. And so you're ticking a box. And what you just said was considered as extra is that you're not really ticking those boxes. And so how do you think that plays into essentially students wanting to seek these resources?
Yeah, I think what happens, especially at FIU with a lot of first gen students, I don't think they know. I don't think they know what they're missing, right? And I think that's really where you start to see the institutional barriers, because the people who know to go find this elsewhere have time, money, they have a mentor, they have some kind of social capital to meet, figure out where they need to go to these workshops or who they need to talk to. And I think definitely at a place at FIU, that's a huge, huge advantage that those students who have those resources can get. Yeah, and then I think maybe also what you were asking a little bit about grade level. So I didn't show you the demographics, but when I showed you that Gen Bio data, our Gen Bio courses only have about 75% bio majors. So there's about 25% of non-bio majors in those courses, people who are either taking, some kind of science requirement they have to fulfill, or maybe a lot of students come in thinking they're going to be a doctor, bio one, chem one kind of knock them out, and they change their major. So that's why we haven't really tried any targeted interventions at the intro level, because I still think people are really changing their minds. But I think by the time we get to sophomore, junior, they're pretty steady. And we see that we haven't done it, but it's in the literature. That is also when people drop out of the pre-med major and change their mind to be something else. Whether or not they leave biology is separate. And I think, like, when we start looking at career goals too, I think when we start looking later, that's why the goals look so steady, because we've already lost that population that's going to change their mind. Yeah, did that answer your question? Yeah, okay. Okay.
Thank you so much. I appreciated the way that you're focusing on the structures and the supports that educators can provide. I think it sort of helps frame the students in more of an asset base than a deficit. I mean, we do talk about things they don't know, but your point overall is that we as educators, the systems need to support them through that. So I really appreciate that. And I wonder, this is not necessarily a problem that the educators, the system can solve, but I wonder ways that, the systems that train the students can also prepare them for the unequal systems that we're sending them into. I know you said, like, oh, maybe I have a hot take about med school or things like that, but I wonder, like, what are some of, you say things like only 40% are going to get in. And we also know that even beyond that, there are some, cultural and other issues in STEM fields that also might be reasons that some of these minoritized students might have a career goal and then find themselves unwelcome once they get there, et cetera. So I just wonder, what are some other things that you've seen that we might do to support, I guess, that part of the structural issue?
So support students to face barriers everywhere.
Yeah, to face barriers or to change change systems that are problematic.
Yeah. So and I'm going to start here and see if this answers your question. We've done a bunch of interviews with students when we ask them what their career goal is and why. And even anecdotally, when you ask a pre-med student why they want to be a doctor, 100% of the time it's they want to help people, right? And I think I help people every day, and I am not a doctor, but I am a scientist. I have a degree in biochemistry, and I help people with it. And so we do a lot of that in the workshops. When we have them look for different kinds of biomedical careers, we have a little worksheet that they fill out, and one of the questions is how will you help people in this job? And I think a lot of, especially at FIU, a lot of students, when I see their personal statements and things like that, they say, like, oh, I come from a country where there was huge wealth disparities. Not everybody got, access to the things they needed. And we do work that kind of mentality into the choosing the career as well. So that's another item on the sheet, like how would you, how in this position, how could you, help equalize your community and things like that. So we do kind of backdoor that. I don't know if we really do it directly. But I do think this idea of helping people is our hook to get people to think about career or plan B. And maybe that's what you were asking. Is that what you were asking? Kind of, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for your talk.
Sure.
Have you noticed any differences across University of Buffalo and where you at in Florida, Florida International University, and how the two universities are supporting students?
We do have UB data, the same assessment. We're a year behind in collecting UB data, so we only have 1 year. On the surface, like quickly looking demographics wise and things like that, we see slight differences. Like most students, a higher percentage of students at UB identify having a mentor, and we don't see that at FIU. And interesting, the mentors, the students at FIU who report having a mentor, it's overwhelmingly a family member, where at UB it's more of a professional a doctor they shadow. What we don't see in either group is people saying that they have a professor as a mentor, which is very interesting. So I think I think that there will be a lot of differences. We are still kind of getting there. The goals are the same, 80%-ish want to go to med school. Do you remember, do we see differences with strategies? I don't think we really saw differences with strategies. Yeah, yeah. But we have not dug deep enough. I know their differences are there. So in 6 months, I'll have a better answer for you. Yeah. Other questions?
Any other questions? Well, thank you so much for
Yes,
joining
thank you
us
for coming,
today. Thank you
everybody.
so much, Dr. McCartney.